This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to the link in the description below so they know that I sent you. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This is a video series where I rank cards based on how well they have performed at Magic's highest competitive level. This week I'm looking at combat tricks. So what's a combat trick? Well, the definition I went with is that a card had to be able to enhance a creature at instant speed. This does not only mean increasing power and toughness, that's why I avoided using the term pump spell, because as we will see, there are some powerful cards out there that grant keyword ability at instant speed that certainly are combat tricks. Combat tricks are incredibly common in Magic, as Wizards likes to make sure there are a few of them to go around in most limited formats. On average, combat tricks tend to have a difficult time breaking into constructed success. This is because they are pretty risky to use in formats where there is a plethora of efficient removal that can 2-for-1 you easily, and temporarily pumping your creature isn't usually going to be worth the risk. As we will see going through the cards in this video though, some combat tricks are worth the risk because they make one-shotting your opponent a real possibility, and others are flexible to help mitigate against that risk. Others existed in metagames where there were nice payoffs for playing combat tricks. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards for these lists. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. Now, let's get started at number 10. At number 10, we have Titan Strength. It gives a nice boost for a single mana, and adding Scry onto that is pretty nice. However, in most standard formats, I don't imagine it would have seen much play. This is the kind of card that just wouldn't be worth the risk most of the time. However, Titan Strength existed in a standard format where aggressive red decks sought to abuse the heroic mechanic, and if you're paying 1 mana for this effect and getting a heroic trigger out of it, well, you're getting more than your mana's worth. It was also reprinted in Magic Origins, and while it didn't see quite as much play because heroic was gone, that standard format's red decks were interested in abusing the similar prowess mechanic, which made it considerably better. Titan Strength got all of its points in standard, and it doesn't seem like the kind of card that will find its way into decks that are interested in combat tricks in other formats, like Modern Infect and Modern and Legacy Death Shadow. Those decks just have access to better tricks, as we'll see as we move up this list. At number 9, we have a combat trick with Kicker in Vines of Vastwood. Vines can be used for a single green mana to make it so your opponent's removal spell fails to get rid of your creature, but the real beatdown comes when you pay the kicker for the huge stats boost as well. If you are already attacking with your creature and they try to kill this, only for Vines of Vastwood to come out of your hand, they're going to take a serious beating, losing a valuable removal spell and taking a huge chunk of damage. Also worth noting that because of how the card works, you can technically target an opponent's creature with it to make your opponent's combat tricks fizzle. That's a corner case type thing that really only shows up in some mirror matches, but it is worth noting. So where has Vine seen play? Pretty much exclusively in Modern and Legacy Infect decks. Like Heroic or Prowess, Infect is a mechanic that can really be taken advantage of by combat tricks, since creatures with Infect need to only do 10 total damage to your opponent in a game before your opponent to lose the game. The Vines protects your valuable Infect creature while making them deal a huge infectious blow to the opponent, sometimes enough to kill them on the spot. At number 8, we have our first example of several on the list of a combat trick that uses flexibility to get around the inherent weaknesses of combat tricks, and that's the split card Wax and Wane. This can be a combat trick when you need it to be. I mean, sometimes what you really need is +2/+2 to win combat or finish off an opponent, but it can also be enchantment hate when it needs to be. Both sides of this card are fairly situational. Neither is a card that you would be playing in your deck in most situations, but when the card has both possibilities, it is going to be useful more frequently, and as a result, Wax and Wane saw a fair bit of play in both Standard and Extended. In Standard, it was played by aggressive decks who could cash in the Wane side if they needed to against powerful enchantments like Fires of Yavimaya and Rising Waters. It also saw play in aggressive Extended decks, where the Wane half was used primarily against Oath of Druids. Wax and Wane is an interesting card to think about for the upcoming Modern Horizons because I think it would have a real chance of seeing play in Modern decks that already like combat tricks, like Death Shadow, since the flexibility it offers is pretty nice. At number 7, we have a combat trick with Delve, and that's become immense, which in most decks that play it is effectively 1 green mana for +5/+5. So this is a combat trick that manages to be played because it's just so efficient. After it was printed, it almost immediately saw play in Modern Infect, since the deck already runs tons of cheap spells, and giving your Infect creature such a huge boost for 1 mana is a good way to just end the game. More recently, it has also seen play in some versions of Death Shadow, a deck I'll go into more depth about further up the list. At the beginning of its time in Standard, it saw play in decks like Green-White Heroic, but its primary home there would be Gruul aggro decks, which were playing tons of cheap instants and sorceries and creatures with prowess, both things that combo pretty well with Become Immense. At number 6, we have what is certainly the most iconic combat trick in the history of the game in Giant Growth, which actually will be getting a reprint in War of the Spark. Part of Magic since the game began in 1993, Giant Growth is the green member of the Boon Cycle, a cycle of cards in each color that cost a single colored mana and do something related to the number 3. Red got Lightning Bolt, blue got Ancestral Recall, black got Dark Ritual, and green got Giant Growth. While it might seem like green got shafted in this cycle, white got Healing Salve, so at least Giant Growth isn't the worst card in it. At any rate, the fact that this gives +3/+3 for a single green mana was attractive in the game's earliest days. You could use it in your creature-heavy decks to bust through your opponent's blockers or get through for the last damage, and all you had to do was leave up a single green mana. Giant Growth managed the top 8 at the very first competitive Magic tournament ever, Worlds in 1994, where it was played in a Zoo aggro deck. It would remain a fixture in aggro decks really until 1999, most frequently featured in mono-green aggro decks typically called Stompy. Being one of Magic's most frequent printed cards in those days gave it a long time for standard legality, and it found some success in the format in both 2006 and 2013 following reprints. It's been played in some modern Infect decks, but never in one that managed the top 8 at a Premier event. Since it's about to be in Standard again, I don't think we can completely rule it out as adding to its score in the near future. At number 5, we have another card that can be more than just a combat trick, and that's Selesnya Charm. Like all charms, it is a modal card. One of those options is that it can be used as a combat trick, and sometimes that's how you'll use it. The fact it grants trample as well as a stats boost can mean you can turn a chump block into game over for your opponent. But when a combat trick isn't what you need, it can do some other stuff, like make a creature token or destroy a big creature. In both block and standard, it was just the kind of card green-white and Naya aggro decks wanted, since it was something of a Swiss Army knife. However, it has never seen play anywhere since rotating. At number 4, we have the only card on the list that isn't actually an instant, and that's Gore Clan Rampager. He comes with the Blood Rush mechanic, effectively making him a modal card. Basically, you can either have a 4-mana 4/4 with trample, or you can use the Rampager like it's a combat trick that gives +4/+4 in trample, and both of those options are pretty nice. Sometimes you need the creature, but the stats boost and the keyword ability he can grant using Blood Rush is arguably the more efficient use of the card. Either way, being able to be a creature when necessary gives us some nice flexibility. In Standard, it was a fixture in Naya, Jund, and Gruul aggro decks. Then, after not seeing play since rotating, in 2016, the Rampager started to see play in Death's Shadow decks. Decks which ran the eponymous creature Death's Shadow and sought to rapidly lower their life total and use combat tricks to one-shot the opponent. And Gore Clan Rampager could help with that by giving trample and a huge power boost. Unfortunately for the Rampager, Jund-based Death's Shadow decks have given way recently to Grixis Death's Shadow decks, where the Rampager doesn't fit quite as well, and it may not find its way to another modern top 8 as a result. At number 3, we have a combat trick that doesn't raise power or toughness at all. Instead, it offers 2 powerful keyword abilities. Obviously, if you can't get the Ferocious going on the Battle Rage, it isn't anything special. Just giving Double Strike for 2 mana isn't really going to move the needle. However, once you have Ferocious, you get a pretty potent combination of Double Strike and Trample, which will result in enormous damage to your opponent even if they blocked your creature. While it saw play in Standard, mostly in Gruul aggro decks, its big breakthrough came in non-rotating formats. It was a key part of what has made Death's Shadow decks into Tier 1 performers. Death's Shadow wasn't very hard to make into something like an 8/8 or a 9/9, and obviously a Battle Rage in those situations results in immediate death for your opponent. Temur Battle Rage is going to continue to put up points thanks to its important role in Death's Shadow. At number 2, we have a combat trick that doesn't even cost mana unless you wanted to, and that's Mutagenic Growth, which can give +2/+2 for 2 life and 0 mana. Phyrexian mana is one of the bigger mistakes Wizards ever made, as it allowed for spells to be way too efficient, especially when it came to spells that became free, like Mutagenic Growth and Gut Shot. If you want to hear me go deeper on Phyrexian mana, I have done a top 10 on that topic as well, but to get back to Mutagenic Growth here, it turns out being free made it really good. What's more is, because it doesn't actually cost mana, it could be shoved into any deck. In fact, the deck it saw the most play in while in Standard was Blue-White Delver, a deck that ran 0 green mana sources. In Modern, it has seen play in both of the combat trick-loving decks of the format we've already mentioned, Infect and Death's Shadow. It is particularly potent in the latter because the fact that you pay life for the effect just makes your Death's Shadow even bigger, and in those decks it amounts to a 0 mana +4/+4 for your Shadow. Try surviving that plus Temur Battle Rage. It is still seeing play in Shadow decks and Modern, so it's going to continue to put up points, and it may even do enough at some point to catch the number 1 card on this list, which is Boros Charm. Like Selesnya Charm, Boros Charm doesn't have to be used as a combat trick, but the fact that it can be when it needs to be is very nice. In the case of the Charm, it really has 2 different effects that can qualify as a combat trick. One is that it can give a creature double strike, and the other that it can make your permanents indestructible. Both of these have their uses. The double strike part can be used when you get through with a creature who can deal lethal, and the indestructibility can be nice if your opponent is trying to trade with creatures or use a board sweeper. To be fair, the mode most frequently used on Boros Charm is the 4 damage effect, and its most frequent home, whatever the format, has been red deck wins and burn decks. However, the fact that Boros Charm can do more than just burn the opponent is certainly a factor in it seeing so much play. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to watch one of the 160 plus MTG Top 10s I've already done, including the one on Phyrexian Mana I mentioned in this video, you can see the playlist on this screen. Thanks for watching.